The move that we so often make in our culture in the West is to say it's random and I'm just making it mean something. It doesn't really get us anywhere. I'd rather say, well, if this is the place speaking to me somehow, if every place has an interiority or a presence or however we want to think about it, what is it trying to tell me? And I actually get farther when I imagine it that way. So freeing the imagination to do that and then to actually make it a conversation where we go back and forth a little bit.
Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't.
Dr. Craig Chalquist, welcome to the new school at Commonweal.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. Hey there, everybody. Good to see all of you too. And my first very welcome task is to thank Kira and Susan Graylock, Yusum, and Michael Lerner, and Ken, and everybody at Commonweal for making this happen and doing all the hard work that it takes to organize something like this, especially when there's multiple events involved in it. Great stuff. I'm really excited about all of this. And I wanted to start us off with a poem. And this is by Joy Harjo. And she's the former poet laureate of the United States. And the poem is called Remember. Remember the sky that you were born under. Know each of the stars' stories. Remember the moon, who she is. Remember the sun's birth at dawn. That is the strongest point in time. Remember sundown and the giving away tonight. Remember your birth, how your mother struggled to give you form and form and breath. You are evidence of her life and her mother's and hers. Remember your father, he is your life also. Remember the earth whose skin you are, red earth, black earth, yellow earth, white earth, brown earth. We are earth. Remember the plants, trees, animal life, who all have their tribes, their families, their histories. Talk to them, listen to them. They are alive poems. Let me give you a quick overview of what we have in mind today, and then we'll go into it then. So as part of this visiting scholar residency, I want to focus on worldviews. I'll explain why in a few minutes. And I want to talk a little bit about just enough to give context to my background and things I'm interested in studying right now, some projects that are going on that relate to all this. I wanted to say something about a new form of change agent. I have some news I received this week about moving that project forward, so I'll tell you about that. And a little bit later, if there's time, we'll do a brief Q&A and then some process work as well. So that's what I have in mind. And throughout all of it will be this thread of imagination used for wisdom, for connecting with each other, and for making change. And that will bind all of it together. So this residency, for me, centers on an invitation, which is to build a new, creative, re-imaginative, and earth-honoring worldview for our time, and assembling it out of inspiring tales from around the world. And it seems to me, and I argued this in the dissertation for my second PhD, that the emphasis on literal absolute belief is overrated. There's a lot of people running around like me who get by on inspiring stories. So when I say worldview, I also mean something like what Young and Joseph Campbell meant by mythology. A mythology for our time, a set of stories that will actually inspire us forward. So I'll talk a little bit about why that would matter. And as part of this residency, also relationship building. An old story that perhaps served us in the past that has worn itself out is the story of the heroic individual who will come along and save us all and sometimes rides in opacity, sometimes not. But it's an old story. It's not workable for our time. And if we're going to get through this time together and even flourish, we have to be the cavalry. There's another part of this too, before I go into a little bit about my background. A couple of years ago, I was in a workshop that was put on by Kelly Carlin. She does it at the end of each year, and it's called Gathering the Gifts. I highly recommend it. And I came out of that workshop with all kinds of things to sit with and insights that I had while I was there. And there was this comment also that's relevant to this that I wanted to mention. One of the participants said, I need a new tribe. And so I sat with that. And then gradually I came to my version of that, which is I need to expand my tribe. I've spent so many years writing and publishing and teaching and being an administrator that I've kind of gotten out of balance with being in the rest of the world. So I want to use this as a pivot to refocus. And as Jung would say, to practice more of my extroversion. I'm an introvert who likes to be around people and meet people. I need to do more of that. So that's what part of this means to me. Now, in terms of my work, from past to present, very briefly, just to give you a little context, I worked as a psychotherapist on and off for 9 years. I worked with violent men in group who had all done jail or prison time, and we did a lot of storytelling with them. So I got to see, even at that point in my career, which was a while ago, how transformative stories can be, and not just old stories, although those are definitely included, but stories about who we are in the world, our guiding stories. So more about that in a moment. For the first PhD, I worked on what I thought of at the time as a psychoanalysis of place. And that became parapsychology, and which a number of us were working on at that time. We were graduate students. And briefly, parapsychology, which we'll be using I'll mention it next time when I talk to Susan Greylock, and also this will be part of our writing event as well. But put simply, it has to do with studying how the world lives in us. I think we all know intuitively that we sometimes have higher insights at the top of mountains, or in my case, I tend to do writing more easily and more in the flow when I'm writing next to a creek. So whether it's that or the built environment, what's going on around us is always present for us and within us, and we study those relationships. So more about that as we go. I mentioned earlier, I've spent a lot of time publishing and teaching and dissertation committees and all that. And I've done a bit of corporate consulting as well. I'm interested in wise leadership, which we desperately need right now. What makes a leader wise? How can they actually lead instead of getting pushed into the background? What would allow us to cultivate that quality of wise leadership, whether it's official in some professional role or whether it's more like being an informal mentor? So that's one of the live classes I've started doing. I teach online a bit now, as well as in the academic world. I'm really interested in story and fiction as wisdom paths, which was the topic of my second dissertation, and also using philosophy in fiction and using fiction as philosophy. So not the kind of fiction where I don't know about you, but I get bogged down when I read something that I want to just kind of uplift me and entertain me, and it's this long philosophical discussion. I don't mean that. I mean working it seamlessly into the story. And one of my exemplars for this has been Ursula K. Le Guin. Another is Roger Zelazny. There's a whole tradition of speculative fiction writers who do this, and I'm interested in that. So my Lamplighter trilogy attempts to do that. And I'll mention, too, that there's a term I got from that trilogy that's at the very center of what my current passions are. So lamplighting refers to the need for a new kind of change agent that's already out there working in the world. And it's something I wanted to give a name to, where people make lasting and even systemic change through imagination, through the arts and creativity. by bringing bits of wisdom, helping us reimagine our guiding stories, opening us up to new possibilities. The form of that I've mentioned in the past is enchantivism, if you want to look that up. That refers to a form of lamplighting that takes utopic possibilities. In other words, where could we go? How could we be together? And shows us that to motivate us. There's a lot of people in the world, including me, who are much more motivated by that than we are by what's going wrong, although we need to know what's going wrong, no question about that. But how can we get somewhere that we want to be unless we can imagine it together first? So that word lamplighting is going to come up a lot, has come up a lot in my work. It'll come up going forward. And I guess I should show you my first prop and my excuse for wearing a tie today. So I don't know if you can see this, but it's upside down. There's little candles on this lamp, on this on this necktie, because this was the closest I could actually come to finding a necktie with lamps on it. So there's my best attempt. But we'll be going into lamplighting a lot in the future events that are coming up. And the news I wanted to tell you, and then let's focus a little bit on worldviews and imagination, is I've been wanting for a while to put together a kind of academy outside of higher ed. And it would basically be one to train lamplighters, to train people to facilitate good change in the world. I think that would be a worthy endeavor, and also bring together the healers and the teachers and the depth workers and the visionaries and the dreamers. So I received word this week, and this is thanks to Omega Resilience Awards and also thanks to Commonweal, that I got a grant, a decent sized grant to actually launch that and make it happen. So there's a website I'm building for it right now at pronoia.org. That's pronoia.org. And then there's a community called Lamplight that's actually accessible through there on the community page. And it's partially up and running now. So we're building that as well. I want the Academy to start by offering a certificate in how to do this kind of deep change in the world, imagination-based, inspiration-based, and also to offer live classes and to offer the online community itself. So there's a lot going on. Also, the word Pronoia. So Pronoia mythologically was the wife of Prometheus. And we don't know much about her, but I suspect it's one of those stories where the guy gets all the credit, but it was actually his wife's doing. So Prometheus is known as being the god of foresight. He always sees things in advance. I think it was her. But in any case, she shows up in other esoteric traditions where she's a wisdom goddess who makes repeated descents from the upper world to our world in order to bring her spark. So also, I should mention too, psychologically, pronoia is the opposite of paranoia. So it seemed like a good name. So that's the news I got. And let's shift a little bit now and talk about worldviews. Why are they the fulcrum for this? So to define a worldview very simply, it's just the guiding story that we hold either internally and individually or collectively. There's both kinds of worldviews. And they're all about who we are and how we relate to each other and where we should go in life and why we're here and things like that. It's a kind of personal philosophy rather than, the big abstract systems philosophy that some of us have heard of. So I was surprised when I just started doing a little bit of research on, how has this been studied? Because worldviews struck me as being a massive fulcrum for change. I know about my own experience and that of my students and workshop participants that when something shifts in my guiding stories, everything else based on that and everything else that I see through those stories also shifts. So I thought, well, there's probably not much research on this. There is tons. So part of what I'm doing with the Visiting Scholar Residency is I'm pulling together some of the research so that we can see what it actually looks like. There's quite a lot of it. The gist of it is that worldviews influence us in ways that we don't even begin to know consciously. They're they're kind of, they're like a myth in a sense, or an archetypal system that we all kind of go by, but we don't realize it. I think of them as keystone fictions that we operate by. And, we could think of examples easily. There's the traditional Christian worldview, and there's one that I think of as the techno-redemption worldview. Technology will save us all. We just need to fund it, right? That's a worldview. Some people have their whole lives organized around that belief. There's the back to nature worldview. There's others too. And so it seems to me that many of the worldviews that are available to us now are pretty outworn in some ways. They don't work for everybody. They work for some people. So a key question for me is, how can we use imagination to melt down our own worldviews and rearrange them into something that would suit our time, something that would be earth honoring, a set of stories and practices that would give us joy, that would help us connect with each other, that would move us forward. There's all kinds of possibilities there. So it's a big arena for working and playing in. And part of what I'm concentrating on in that arena is something that has gone by the word gnosis, Gnosis. It's an old Greek term for knowing, for understanding, and how imagination has been used that way as a form of deep knowing in so many different traditions. My study, my PhD dissertation, thesis, whatever you want to call it, takes this back to ancient Egyptian religion, where there are powerful ideas and casts of colorful characters. There's the beginnings of alchemy there. Not alchemy in terms of let's change this into that only, let's change, lead into gold or something, but as a wisdom path. There is Hermeticism and Gnosticism, which are esoteric traditions that both come out of Alexandria. There is the idea in later alchemy of the philosopher's stone, which is a kind of a magical agent of transmutation. Jung thought it was a symbol of wholeness. I tend to hold it more as imagination in service to wholeness, individual and collective both. I think the stone is a process. I think that's what the alchemists meant when they said a stone that's not a stone. I could mention other areas too, Islamic gnosis, European romanticism, philosophy in poetry, transcendentalism, Jung's work. All of this runs along that path, or actually are branches of what I think of as a silver tree of gnosis, where this tradition of imagination as a form of deep knowing continues to flow even into our day. And all of the practitioners and artists and alchemists and everybody else who participates in that, all the way down the line, all the way through this stream, they insist that imagination, when consciously used, can make wonders and make enormous changes, which are depicted in many different ways in art, in philosophy, you name it. But they also point out that imagination is dangerous, that if it's used unconsciously, it can destroy. And so one of the key characters in alchemy, I like his name, Mercurius. And he's sometimes imagined as Mercury, but he's more than that. He's more like a wizard figure. And there's a saying from Mercurius, and he's talking as though he himself were the philosopher's stone. He says, "For healthful I can be, but also poisonous." So the question is, do we use imagination consciously for beneficial stories that will move us forward, or the other way? So in terms of moving us forward, part of my work in my dissertation was to develop something I referred to as depth philosophy. My background's in depth psych, now it's in philosophy as well. But specifically one strand of that I think is important for us is to use imagination for something that one of my teachers, Dr. Mary Watkins, said to me many years ago when I asked her, so what is an extroverted depth psychology for? If we were doing depth work out in the world, what would that actually look like? And she said, oh, it would look like a cultural therapeutics. And I went, what? And at that point, I had had psychotherapy training and practice. And so I knew what the usual therapeutics looked like. But I had no idea of what a cultural therapeutics looked like. I think of it now as worldview therapy, among other possibilities. Therapy for the culture, transformation for the culture. And that's the direction that my work has been increasingly heading in. I've spent a lot of years teaching in terms of individual transformation, and at this point, I'm interested more in cultural transformation and the possibility of changing our guiding stories and expanding them, making them more expansive, more deep, and even replacing them when we need to. And these are all things that we need to do together. Something that's common to a lot of worldviews that are floating around today is the idea that the individual all alone in a room can do inner work or dream work or meditation or whatever, and somehow magically change the entire world. And that, if you read the news, that doesn't seem to be working out very well. And it's not that those things are unimportant. Of course they are. Everybody should be doing their version of that. Deep reflective work. The more people doing it, the better. But as a wise therapist pointed out to me in my own therapy many years ago, changing, how did she put it? When you've been traumatized by something relational, then the way to heal is by something relational. That some of these big problems of our time are problems not only of imagination, but they're problems of relationships. They're problems of stories, guiding stories that have gone awry. And in many cases, and I think this surprises a lot of us, there are people who are caught in worldviews that are actually sicker than those people. So that's what I'm addressing when I say worldview therapy. And I was going back through Abraham Maslow's work, and I'm not a really big fan of the hierarchy of needs, but I like some of his work over here and work over there. And there's this kind of throwaway comment he makes in his published writings and also in his journal, where he says, we've got all these great psychotherapists who address pathology and dysfunction, as we would now call it, and things like that, mental illness, right? But where are the people who address the meta pathology of our need for beauty and our need for meaning and purpose and vision and to grow to our full stature? And so he meant that in an individual context, and it's certainly valuable there, but I'm wondering about that in terms of the culture itself. So in terms of a new possibility for a worldview that would actually fit our time, Campbell and Young would say a mythology. There's three pieces. I want to spend the rest of this talk kind of pulling on like threads a little bit to set the stage for what we're going to do, not only today, but in later events as well. So the three I want to spend a little time on is imagination, storytelling, and re-entering the great conversation with everybody, all the other living things who live on the world with us. When you walk outside in the morning, which I do pretty much every morning early, there's a lot going on out there. There's birds and there's insects and there's plants and there's the mountains themselves near here, the range that I walk under, and everybody is talking to everybody else and not necessarily to us. And so how do we get back into that conversation where we can hear what's going on, but not necessarily make it all about us and humans, and instead that we are part of that bigger conversation? And I think this is where imagination and storytelling can really serve us. So a couple of examples of what I mean, starting with imagination and working story in as well. So Young noticed and wrote about something that really startled him when he began doing experiments with his own imagination, called it his confrontation with the unconscious. And he One time in particular, which he writes about in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and also in his red and black books, so his journals. There's a couple of figures who pop up, and he just sort of, we'll be practicing this too as we go into other events, especially the writing workshop. But, he gets into kind of a daydreamy place, and he just lets whatever internal figures surface who want to. It's kind of it's like a conscious daydream state, and it takes some patience. Sometimes nobody shows up right away. Sometimes really surprising people show up. Like in his case, there was Elijah who showed up, the figure out of biblical history, and accompanied by Salome, also out of biblical history. And they started saying really surprising things to Jung, and he was puzzled by that. And at one point, he made the mistake of trying to interpret them psychologically. So he said to Elijah, I think your logos, the principle of meaning and thought and all the other things that logos comes to mean in philosophy and religion, I think that's you. And then I think he points to her and he says, I think you're eros, the principle of love and attachment and all that. And Elijah looks directly at him and says, we are real and not images. And Jung goes, wow. So he explains, they taught me that there are things in the psyche that I do not produce with my conscious mind. And he spends a big chunk of both his red and black books. The black books are his journal, multi-volume over 19 years. The red book is an excerpt from the journal. He spends a lot of space in there talking to those internal figures, and he's got a whole cast of characters who surface for him. And he spends a lot of time arguing with them. He doesn't automatically just lay down and take their advice. And sometimes they show up and they make fun of him, or they show up and they tell him, you're doing great work in the world, keep doing it. Mostly they show up to teach him. One figure in particular who he refers to as Soul, who I'm convinced is actually Sophia. That was Jung's inner teacher. So my own much smaller version of this, I've been studying Jungian psychology since my 20s and playing with active imagination. It still surprises me after all these years. And I had a dream several years ago that there was a group of religious, very highly reactionary religious fundamentalists who formed an organization with a group of what we would now call techno bros, high-tech people. And they formed an organization that in the dream was called SMOKE as an acronym. I had no idea what it meant. They were chasing the gods. And they chased them to a beach where there was a man putting the gods aboard boats and ferrying them out to safety. That was my dream. Lots of different ways to hold that. So I thought, I'm going to write a story about that. And I did. It's called Godsylum. It's in one of my story collections. And I mention this because at the time that image came to me in the dream, especially the SMOKE organization, I thought, that's really weird. But I don't think that now. I haven't thought that since the last several months, actually. I don't think it's weird at all. So oftentimes in our imaginings, all of us probably at some point, these inner figures come up, symbols, images, whatever it is, and they point toward things that are brewing in the collective imagination that haven't happened yet. So there's plenty of examples of that from fiction. Let me give you another that was very surprising to me. That one was too, but there's a character named Lucas who's been showing up in my dreams for some time, almost as long as that image has popped up. And I didn't realize at first that he would become the protagonist of a novel. He had to work on me for a while. And so at one point I started writing the novel. It's called Soul Mapper. It's my first novel. And I was out doing active imagination with Lucas because I talked to my characters. And they aren't really my characters, by the way. They're their own characters, I think. I just write the stuff down. But at one point I was out walking and just sort of mentally conversing with him. And I said, I don't really know what your myth is. And I was following Jung here, who in his letters talks about being identified with Faust, the alchemist and wizard. And in the letter, Jung says, that's my life myth. So it seems like what Jung was saying is that a personal myth isn't something that you just invent creatively. You can work with it creatively, but it's like having a somatic self or a personal, not personal, a parental self if you're a parent, a spiritual self, what have you. Jung seems to have thought we had a mythic self too, somebody we come in with. And so I was thinking along those lines. So to Lucas, in this active imagination, and by the way, it's quite common for authors to talk to their characters. Tolkien did it, Le Guin did it, bunches of examples. So I said, I've written about maybe 2/3 of this novel, maybe a little bit more, and I actually have no idea what your personal myth is. And so I'm saying this as I'm walking at like 6:30 in the morning down a trail where I usually walk. And people are passing occasionally and I'm like, hello. And internally I'm having this conversation with my character. And so I said, what's your personal myth? And he told me. And I look back in my mind at the scenes I had written and the events. And I thought, of course it is. It couldn't be any other myth, right? So I won't spoil it and tell you what it is. But he knew it before I did, which was amazing to me. I just never get used to this. So in terms of imagination, as it could inform a new worldview, that would certainly have to be part of it. That our imagination tells us things that we didn't know. It gives us guidance that we didn't expect, feedback that may be unwanted or painful, but is necessary. And so this comes up in dreams too. And here I'll bring in a little bit of the parapsychology piece. So in dreams, there's this almost magical ability that the psyche has that Jung gave a name to. He called it personification. And it means that the mind can take just about any experience that we have and turn it into a dream symbol or character. It's amazing. And we usually are used to thinking of those of us who do the work with dreams. Well, this symbol means this part of my life, or that symbol means this part of my personality, or whatever. And that's valid as far as it goes. But what led me into my first dissertation was the startling discovery that places where I had lived or currently lived were showing up in my dreams as people. Starting with San Diego, which is where I was born. A witch-like character. And I think even to this day that if I like to look at places from orbit just to see what they look like on pictures taken by satellites and astronauts and whatnot. And when I look at San Diego, she actually seems like she has the face of a witch looking westward. You have to find out for yourself if that's true. But she's got a Point Loma nose and Mission Bay eyes. And the more they've dredged out the bay in San Diego, the more she frowns. And the figure in the dream who made me aware of this had a large frown down one side of her face and actually told me in the dream, I'm San Diego. Like, idiot, don't you get it? And I didn't. I wasn't born into an animistic worldview. So parapsychology in part asks, what these dream characters, when they show up, how do they connect us with place? How do they connect us with world? What are the themes that are playing out in specific places? Los Angeles starts out many millions of years ago, and I'm thinking specifically of the LA basin. So over millions of years, unlike the rest of the coast, it starts rotating upward from the depths of the Pacific Ocean, almost like a stage breaking the surface. And it was used as a visioning place by native Californians for thousands of years. It was a vision place long before Hollywood ever got there. And so the later theme of angels and demons in Los Angeles isn't just a random name that some colonizers picked. It's it's in the land itself. It's in the place itself. So parapsychology tries to understand through these themes and dream characters, who is here? What is here? What's the presence of this particular place? And how do we interact with it? And how does it get into our moods? There's another take too I wanted to mention. I brought a couple of props here. On the topic of what Jungians call synchronicity, which is often something we don't connect to place. And synchronicity having to do with, when there's a meaningful coincidence, we're trying to work through something and then we see an example of it in the outer world, something happens. And so many years ago, when my first book was repeatedly rejected, I was out walking on a beach in Santa Barbara and asking myself, should I really be a writer? This is kind of discouraging. I'm not sure what I should do about this. And there had been a storm in the night and it blew up a lot of debris on East Beach where I was walking. And so as I was asking myself this, I don't know if you can see this. It's a little refrigerator magnet that had washed up on the beach. And it was mixed up with all the driftwood. And another time I was walking out that way, I was trying to work out something that was puzzling to me. And I found one of these. This was some years after that. And then in between the two events, I was puzzling on something else and I found this just sitting on the path, right? So we usually think of those as synchronicities, those of us who've studied Carl Jung's work, but I'm starting to wonder if they're gestures. I'm starting to wonder if the place itself somehow is giving us a message that we need to hear, like our imaginal figures do in dreams. So it's an open question. So one other thought about this, and then I'm going to give you some points for later exploration and reflection, should you be motivated to do that. So all of this that I've been talking about is implied in the old stories, the old myths, the old folktales, where places like Mount Fuji is an actual character, and Pele, with her fiery temperament or volcanic temperament. There's a Korean tale that warns people that they're out of balance with nature and the kingdom will be destroyed if they don't recover the ability to listen to the language of the earth spirits. There are wise animals, wise plants. There are conversations between the plants about, those human beings, they're so reckless and they destroy so much, but we're going to heal them anyway. And even in fairy tales, there's Anderson's where objects themselves speak, show up as presences. And I see some of that even today. There was a meme that goes around in social media some years ago. It's still running, called instant karma, where people do something thoughtless and the consequences are instant. And there was a guy running down the street and he decided to punch a stop sign and it whirled around and hit him in the face. So as Jung would put it in his Red Book, this is the time when things speak. So all of that, I think, for my version of a new worldview would belong there somewhere. A lot of this I hold very tentatively and playfully and with imagination. It's not about proof. It's not about evidence. It's not really even about taking things literally. It's about the stories that move us forward and help us be closer to each other and ourselves and the earth. So with that, I will, first of all, let's see here. I will see if I can get this into the chat and I'll also read it to you. These are prompts for later work. If you come to our events, we will talk about them there as well. But some questions. So which stories, I recommend making a list of this, which stories, films, shows changed how you perceive the natural world? For me, Dune, the science fiction, that was my entry into ecology. Ursula Le Guin was influential that way too, with some of her work. The word for world is forest. That's the title of one of her novels. Here's an exercise to try. Rewrite your birth, the circumstances of your birth, as a fairy tale or a myth. And see how that feels differently from I was born at this time in this place, blah, blah, blah. We usually state it factually. See what happens if you state it mythically. What are the earliest tales told where you live now, and by whom? Who were the original people there? Where do you feel welcome and where not? Have you ever been in a place that just seems to hate you? I have. I've been in a couple of places like that, and I always think, I'm sorry I came here. Where does place history thematically overlap with your history? Where are some of the events going on in a place symbolically paralleling events in your life? That's a terrapsychology question. What relations did your ancestors have with the natural world? And are there patterns that have come down through the family? I'm an adoptee who also did a lot of research to find and contact his birth parents. So I get to have two families to see these patterns that go down through a family. There are elemental family themes, like on in my birth families, my mother's side is all water, boat people and sailors and all kinds of water imagery. In my birth father's family, it's all fire. That wasn't going to be a good mix. The marriage didn't last. Another question, for a new mythology, worldview, whatever you want to call it, what would it be like? You know, if there was an adequate story for our time, what would it have in it? You don't have to write the whole thing yourself, but who would be in it? And an exercise. So this one starts with a phrase, in 100 years, a better world will include ... So here the task is to imagine something specific. How would it actually show up? So, you know, of course, a world without racism, a world without sexism, and things like that, naturally. But what would that actually look like? Try to imagine it. And my Lamplighter trilogy that I've written is actually my own attempt to do exactly that. How are we going to face what's coming between climate chaos and everything else that we have to deal with? Who are the exemplary people that don't see themselves as heroes who are going to step up to that? So I will finish just with a reminder of what Kira said earlier. On June 10th, 1 to 2:30 is my conversation with Susan Greylock Newsom, which I'm really looking forward to. The theme will be dreaming the soul of the earth. And we've talked a little about what we might converse on, but it will also flow and just be whatever it is, whatever comes up. I'm looking forward to that. June 10th. On June 17th, 2 to 4 is the creative writing workshop, which we will record part of. I'll be in Bolinas for that, and we'll do some walking around for that part of it. There will be some writing exercises. We'll talk about writing with these imaginal characters in mind and how they connect us to place and earth. And I'll have a few things to say terrapsychologically about Bolinas as well, which is a very interesting place. So with that, I think maybe we've got a few minutes for Q&A.
I'm curious about like forming relationships. You talk about the world speaking to you like through your beach experience with the puzzle piece and these signs that we see or hear or perceive, but there's a state of being of like becoming into relationship with that being. And that's whether then it doesn't matter if it locates in your psyche or if it locates from the earth animate itself, but it's in that relationship space. And like, how do we move us toward that collectively? I wonder.
Yeah, that's part of what we'll be working on, and part of what I've been working on in my own way too. So I think freeing the imagination enough to play with ideas is part of it, and play with encounters, like these ones I've mentioned. When I find these things, you know, the move that we so often make in our culture in the West is to say, it's random and I'm just making it mean something. It doesn't really get us anywhere. But I'd rather say, well, if this is the place speaking to me somehow, if every place has an interiority or a presence, or however we want to think about it, what is it trying to tell me? And I actually get farther when I imagine it that way. So freeing the imagination to do that, and then to actually make it a conversation where we go back and forth a little bit. So some people do ritual work. They might do a little ritual in a place they feel grateful for. I was just talking to somebody in Australia who's doing that. There's lots of ways to do it. and it's even more fun when you do it in a group. I took some students into the mission in San Francisco some years ago as part of a class I taught called Planetary Psychology. And we were standing underneath this, near this cafe, and there was this big chrome butterfly or silver butterfly as a piece of wall decor. And I mentioned to the students, this has some symbolism in Greek and other mythologies. It tends to stand for the psyche and things like that. The word does. But I've never seen a butterfly in this part of town. And as soon as I said that, a butterfly drifted down and it landed on one of the students. And he loved that because he loves butterflies. And he had just been thinking about one when we walked up. And so it's fun when it's a group and you all have this feeling like the place is shaking hands with you somehow. And that's how I do it. One way I do it.
Kelly and Rose are raising their hand.
Let's see. Kelly.
Thank you. Hi, Craig. Nice to see
you. Hey there. You too.
So I'm having this interesting experience. I've been doing dream tending with Stephen Eisenstadt, and we do a lot of work in this active imagination stuff. And one of kind of my places of my portal to go into my dig, that's what we call it, is been Will Rogers State Historic Park, where I've spent a lot of time in my life, and also been riding horses recently there. And the fire came through in the Palisades fire, and it's just been so interesting because I have these two figures that are kind of my lead guide figures, and they've just both been kind of stunned lately. Like I go to encounter them and they're just in this stunned place, and I can't get on the land itself. Like I so desperately want to get on the land to connect with it. And it's just been very interesting because I have this like deep rational side that, thinks I'm crazy. And then of course I have these deep, deep experiences with the deep imagination. But just this recent experience of this and watching these imaginal figures even being stunned into silence and paralysis in some way. And I just wanted to kind of put that out there and share that. I don't know if I have a question even with this. This is like the safest space I can talk about this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm reminded a little bit of, and I heard about that too. I'm so sorry about that. It's when we lose places like that, it's a real loss, and our culture doesn't make any room for that. The grief that we go through when it happens, I was reminded a little bit by what you said of something Matt Cochran did many years ago. He was one of our original group that were talking about parapsychology. And he said, I think I'm going to go out to Trinity and camp illegally where the first atomic bomb was detonated just to see what happens. And I'm like, really? Wow. And he went out there and he had nightmares for, 2 nights in a row, and then he left. And he had to camp in the backcountry for like a month to get back into balance with himself. Yeah. But then he went out there again. And then one of the things he discovered was that there are petroglyphs on the rocks. I wish I had that. I don't have it in this room. He sent me a picture of it that I framed. There are petroglyphs thousands of years old that look, if you look at them through a modern lens, they look like jets and bombs and explosions. And so he started talking to people in that area, and they said, this was the place of Thunderbird. This is where that comes from. And so we're acting it out unconsciously by making it a bombing range and a gunnery range, right? And so it just seems to me that even when those inner figures themselves are stunned by the amount of destruction that goes on in a place, they still talk. Yeah. And sometimes, in my case, when I have encountered my own version of that, I kind of become, maybe it's the habit of being a therapist, but I kind of become their therapist a little. Yeah. And say things to them like, and I know you've had this training, tell me about the stun part and what's going on with you. And, Yeah. And what I try to do is and if they need space, I leave them alone, but I try to carry the conversation forward to see where it will go and how I might help them recover from what happened. I don't know if that helps or not. That's just my own way of dealing with it.
It does, because I think I've been so deferential to them and letting them lead, and really trying to be the follower of them. But to be able to bring myself forward and say, do you want to talk about this? Do you need some guidance? Is there any place on the land you would like to go imaginally with me right now? Like that like gives me a portal now into like, okay, and maybe the land will then show the three of us where we need to go. And yeah, so thank you. That really does offer a little crack in this story, right? Of like this locked on thing that I have. So yeah, thank you, Craig. It's beautiful. Thank you, really.
Great question. Rose.
Hi, Greg. Great talk and really, really fascinating. This whole conversation. I love the idea of how do we rejoin the great conversation. I think that's been preoccupying me for a long time as well. I've recently been reading David Abrams' All of the Sensors and really getting into this, opening up to the possibilities of communication coming from without. I wanted to go back a little bit to your discussion of worldviews, just to slightly play devil's advocate a little bit, because I recently read an article by Bayo Akomolafe where he basically says, I'm against worldviews. And I found it really a fascinating kind of take that he gave, with this idea that if we talk about worldviews as sort of things that are kind of available to us, it's almost framing them as if we're in this kind of worldview shop. We're outside of it. We can kind of pick which worldview we fancy today. And the idea that it's not actually a voluntary act. You can't step outside far enough of the worldview you're steeped in. It's he ends the article saying, it's not the elephant in the room, it is the room. And you can't then access it in this voluntary way. He talks about cracks and hauntings and things that kind of come to you without that kind of agency, I suppose. So I've just sort of wanted to put that to you as kind of, I wonder if we need to be a bit careful in the way that we talk about worldviews to avoid this basically this worldview that is choice.
I tend to agree with him. I haven't seen that particular piece of his writing, but I've heard him speak and written and read other things he's written. I like his work a lot. He calls himself a trickster too, which is cool because he kind of is one. So of course he likes the edges and the cracks and all that stuff, In terms of worldview dreaming up together, I don't think we want a cafeteria. We can go into that a little bit more in other events that are coming. I sometimes address that in my classes because there's a bit more time in a class, but I don't think we want to do that. I don't think it works. It's kind of like when people do personal myth work and they say, oh, I like Galahad, or, I want to be Isis for a while or whatever. And they can kind of get a little bit out of it by doing that, by trying it on. I don't want to rule out the possibility of playing with some of this because I think it can be valuable. But I tend to go along a bit with many people who talk about worldviews as mythologies or vice versa, who say it really has to arise from collective consciousness somehow through creative actions. And it's a big point that Campbell makes toward the end of his work, which I try to think of as the post-heroic phase of his work. I have some concerns about hero as a template, but to set those aside for a minute, in his later work, he says our myths, our mythologies, and I would add our worldviews are in fragments. And we can't put them back in the bottle. We can't get them back together. So we need to lean on our creative visionaries and artists and people like that to have the elements to tell new stories with and let them arise that way. So does that kind of address what you're raising a bit, or? Yeah, thank you for that. Great question. I think what we'll do now is a bit of the process side of things where we, in the communications that went out, we had asked for dreams and the possibility of talking about that a little bit. So let me say a word about that. We're looking at dreams a little bit differently from the usual way of doing it. And I hinted at this when I talked about parapsychology and the different figures who show up from place. So in this way of thinking about it, we won't have time to work through a full dream the way they really should be worked on, or with, actually, not on. But we can't do that. But what we can do is hear the dream. Short ones are good for this because there's limited time here. But and look for some of the themes that connect us with the world. That could be the world of nature. It could be the world of cities. I think of those sometimes as world dreams, for want of a better term. Dreams that aren't primarily about us. They're more about our relationship to what's happening outside of us and helping us be aware of that. I'll give you maybe an example or two of mine, just to kind of prime the pump a little bit. So it must have been 6 months before the national election in the US. And I had a dream. It was very brief. There were no people in it, but there was a city, New York. And in the dream, the Empire State Building had been turned into Barad-dûr, which is the headquarters of the character Sauron, who's the primary villain in The Lord of the Rings. So in the dream, I'm looking at this tower that's been turned into, you've seen pictures of it, even if you're not familiar with the stories. It's that tower with these two evil-looking spikes, and it's got this giant eye in the middle of it looking at people. So in the dream, I was like, oh my God, And then at that point, a gigantic wave came in from the ocean and washed over the entire thing. And the dream ended right at that point. And I woke up going, what happened? Did it wash the tower away? Did it do this? Did it do that? I don't know. I have no idea. But the dream felt to me like it was more kind of my unconscious tapping into the collective imagination. It didn't feel like it was so much about me personally. So that would be an example of a dream about a specific place. One other dream I could mention, I dreamed after that, a couple of months after that UFOs were landing, a recurrent symbol in my dreams. And in the dream, they felt like a beneficial presence. So I was looking up at the sky. I was outside somewhere, and the sky was filled with this fleet of UFOs, and they were all landing. And I felt like it was a visitation of some kind in the dream. The feeling I had was awe, like, wow, And then there was a scene change. I like how dreams are so much like drama, like Jung pointed out. And spiritual healers and mentors and teachers of every conceivable kind you can imagine were fanning out over the earth. It wasn't so linear as they came out of the ships or the ships inspired them or anything like that. It was just this scene change. This thing happened and then that. And so in my dreams, oftentimes sky things are about symbolically about the future. I come from a birth family that full of pilots. So they're always up in the air. And my grandmother actually wrote a poem that links past and future with contrails up in the air. Her son was a pilot. So it felt to me like there was something really auspicious getting ready to happen. But with dreams like this, with world dreams, I didn't want to make it literal. I wanted to just play with it a little bit. Like, what do I think about when I think about UFOs? What do I think about spiritual teachers fanning out over the land and stuff like that? So I just have been sitting with that. But some people dream about natures, about the ocean or whales.
Perfect. Well, do you have any final words, Craig? You want to wrap anything up for folks?
A couple of quick things. As part of this academy I want to build, I've started creating a website. There's a community that goes with it called Lamp Cove that I've been working on for a while, and it's partially operational. So if you go to that community page at pronoia.org, so it's PRONOIA, that's right, org/community, you can go in through there and look around a little bit. I wanted to give people a community experience to go along with the school, and we'll build community in other ways too. And also just keep dreaming, especially when the world shows up and gives you a tap on the shoulder, and see what the signal is maybe.
Thank you, Craig. And thank you everybody for sharing.
Yeah.
It took a few minutes to get you guys to share your dreams, but when they came out, they're just all so amazing, and you can really see right into your hearts. Thank you all for coming. And as we've said several times, we have a couple more events with Craig coming up in June. June 10th and June 17th, and you can find all the information on our website, tns.commonweal.org. If you're on our mailing list or if you follow us on any of the podcast channels, you'll see it when it comes out. So until the next time, thank you for being with us. Craig, thanks for being at the New School at Commonweal. We're so happy you're with us.
Oh, I'm happy to. Thanks so much. Hope to see you all again.
Don't take it, 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 don't take it,
The river is a healer, the river is a sage. The river knows no end and the river feels no way.